Hello, everyone. This is Joe Lombardo. I'm the co-coordinator of the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC, and we are doing interviews with members of our administrative committee as a way to introduce people on the administrative committee and speak about some issues of the day and topics that they are interested in speaking on. So today we have Bamin Azad, who is a member of the UNAC Administrative Committee. Bamin is also the Executive Secretary of the U.S. Peace Council. He represents the World Peace Council at the United Nations. He is the coordinator of the No Basis Coalition. He works with the Sanctions Kill Coalition and other movements, and he's been a lifelong activist in the movement for peace and justice. So welcome, Bamin.
Thank you, Joe.
So today we're going to talk about imperialism and the peace movement. Imperialism is something that's talked about a lot, and I don't know that it really understood what it is. So why don't we start with trying to define what imperialism is? Can you do that for us, Bamin?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, I don't want to go by book definitions and anything like that or any different interpretations. I try to give it a kind of a schematic view and simple to understand, I hope. First thing that everybody has to recognize is that imperialism is not a policy. It's not a tendency to dominate by itself. So some people have it, some leaders have it, some don't, some government have it, some don't. That's not the story. Imperialism is a result of the development, historical development of the capitalist system. It is a certain stage in its development. How do I mean that? Okay, let me just give you some visual or kind of description. Well, we know capitalism started with competitive market economy. That was the initial phase. And when people talk about capitalism, they always have that initial 16th, 17th century model in their mind. They think this is what capitalism is all about, freedom and competition, which is not true, no longer true. This competitive capitalism, the way it operated, you know, like every competition, some people lose and some people win. And the competition between firms and companies is over who grows faster, who gets a larger share of the market, and who controls the market better. Of course, when you have 500 different firms, no single one can really control. But when it's reduced to two major ones, you see that. And the competition by its nature leads to inequality, because there's always a minority that wins over the majority that loses. It's like a lottery ticket, you know. Everybody puts in their $1, $2, $5, but somebody gets 100,000. And this is how it works. This is a competition. So by its nature, it leads to more and more concentration of power and capital, and in the hands of fewer and fewer and fewer companies. And that has been the trend. I'll give you one example. At the beginning of 20th century, there were about 200 auto manufacturing companies in the US. At the end of 20th century, there were 4 or 5. And this is a result of competition, free competition itself. So it's bound to lead to monopoly. So competitive capitalism by its very nature ends up in monopoly capitalism. Or oligopoly, they call it technically, because it's not just one. Although in certain cases there are, if you go to your, for example, cable TV provider, you see that every region is divided into, different realms of influence of companies. So certain company serves one county, another serves another county, and there's no competition. So monopoly is an outcome, natural outcome of that competition. And it took decades for the US to move in that direction. And it's not the US, it's global capitalism. Okay, now these monopolies grow and become bigger and bigger and bigger as they move forward. Now, like a baby gorilla in a small cage that is outgrowing its cage, it has to break out of that cage if it wants to survive. They are too big for the local market or the national market. They have to produce more. Any of them that limits themselves to the boundaries of the country is going to lose at the end, because the other one will expand, get bigger, and take them over. So after monopolization really saturates the domestic market or the national market, capitalism moves what we know historically as into colonialist phase. They break out of political boundaries of the country, move into other countries, take over other territories, and the main purpose of it is to get the raw material for the huge production that they are doing, and at the same time sell the extra products that they cannot sell at their national market. This is the phase of colonialism or colonialist capitalism that we have been having in the 19th century or so, 17th, 18th, 19th century. Now, this is based on globalization of trade, because this term globalization is constantly used without any real meaning, substance, as if it's just interconnection. It's not. There are certain things that interconnect in this globalization process. So the first phase of globalization of capitalism, which is not the 21st century, it's the 20th century and end of 19th century, is becoming a colonialist capitalism, in the sense that it globalizes its operations and takes over territories. Now, with colonialism, the issue becomes, okay, you don't want the colonies to develop their economies as a competitor to you. So you trap them in their backward stage or undeveloped stage, so that they depend on your production, your commodities, your products. At the same time, you don't want them to turn their workers or farmers, turn them into industrial workers, right? Because then they would be working for their own country and not you. So you don't want to create competition. So you trap the colonies into this, within the stage that they are, and don't let them grow. And this has been going on for decades, centuries. Okay, now the trade gets bigger and bigger, and the production gets bigger and bigger. And now you're supplying the rest of the world with your finished products. For example, British colonialists really were competing with Indian textile industry. They crushed it, right? And they really moved all the possibilities into Britain. Now they're exporting textiles to the rest of the world, or other manufacturing stuff, right? When the trade gets beyond a certain level, it's not economical anymore to produce in one center and distribute throughout the world, because you have to bring all the raw materials you need from around the world into one center, bring the energy sources from around the world into one center, right? Produce and ship everything back. It's not economical beyond a certain level of trade under colonialism. So the production becomes globalized. The next phase, you try to produce near your markets, you try to produce near where your raw material are, right? That changes the whole picture, because with the international production, now you have to control the governments, the conditions of production. So you have to set up dictatorial regimes all over the world to protect your investments in those countries, right? And always, as always, this investment is followed by military to protect those investments, right? So when you invest so much money or capital in another country, which is unsafe because this is based on destroying the other country's development, entrapping the people, keeping them from developing their own economies. So there is a lot of dissatisfaction going on, and things can change. And we have history of countries when people took over the government, they nationalized foreign investments and everything else. So military has to go in there to protect it or be around, nearby. And that is the development of military bases all over. So that there is rapid deployment forces, everything else to be prepared for control, right? Now there is another aspect to this, which is now you are exploiting the labor power, labor force of those countries because you need to bring them into your production process, turn them into your laborers. What imperialism does, this is the phase of imperialism that we're talking about when we're talking about globalized production. At the same time, parallel with this, as these corporations become global, the need for financial investment, the need for capital investment grows rapidly. And concurrent with the growth of imperialism, you're talking about the growth of the financial sector as the backbone of this international investment, right? So you're talking about banking and financial sector of the capitalist system growing more and more predominant role, assuming more predominant role, and really deciding the fate of the industry itself towards the maturation of it. Because the banks now look at which industry is more profitable, they invest in it or lend to it. And which one is less profitable, they don't lend to it. They want higher return on it.
So you're saying basically that instead of building more factories in the United States, for instance, it becomes more profitable for the capitalists to invest and build these other places, perhaps where there's cheaper labor or no unions or no environmental regulations or safety regulations.
And there is also an iron fist government that controls the workers, controls the population, and guarantees the security of those investments. So setting up puppet regimes all over the world is another feature of it.
Yeah. So we find, for instance, the United States has somewhere between 800 and 1,000 foreign military bases. The number is not clear because I think if you look at the Pentagon's website, they list their bases, but they don't list all their bases. They don't list any bases, for instance, in Syria or in a number of other countries where I know there are bases. People have given an estimate of sometimes around 1,000, but either of those estimates make it about 20 times the number of foreign military bases as all other countries in the world combined. And so an imperialist country which has resources that it gains its wealth from other countries, you're saying would need to have a string of a military presence to ensure its investment, basically.
Look at the example of Iraq, for example. The first thing the US, the invasion of Iraq did was to protect the oil fields. Now in Syria, US are protecting the oil fields. Who controls these oil fields? Transnational companies, Exxon, whatever, right? Now, when you spend so much money, go in there for the purpose of protecting the investments of these international corporations. What are you doing? You're using public funds to protect private interests.
Yeah.
It's not the US government that's collecting money from those oil fields, right? It's those Exxon, Mobil, and others. So in a sense, US government at the expense of the people through tax monies is upholding the profits and investments of private corporations, right? So I usually use this term. When you buy a service from let's say your cable company, at the end of the month, they send you a bill and they say, okay, we provided this service to you. Here's your bill. You owe us $100. Please pay. I wouldn't mind it, metaphorically, if Pentagon at the end of each month sent a bill to these companies, say, okay, we protected your oil fields. We used so much fuel to do that. We used so many lives, lost so many lives. We used so many equipment. We used so much this, that, right? So many people are dead. And here's the cost. Please pay $3 trillion this month for what we did for you.
Instead, they do the
Don't
opposite.
do that.
They give the tax breaks to the oil companies. It's
Yes.
very much like what's happening during the COVID-19 crisis, where trillions of dollars are being used, basically given to these corporations to shore them up and make sure they can succeed and make sure they can continue to make money. So the same thing happens overseas that seems to happen here.
And
So
one problem also that there is with it is that they pretend as if the U.S. as a nation is benefiting from these operations.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, well,
Okay.
we don't benefit.
First of all, they take the profits made out of the countries where they are making the profits and take it to their account, mostly offshore accounts.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
They don't pay taxes on it to begin with.
Yeah.
Although they get all those subsidies for support, right? At the same time, whatever they bring to the United States, what do they use it for? For controlling the Congress, for lobbying, for changing the laws, for running political campaigns in favor of their own interests. So both sides, the people of the dominated nation, of course, it's very clear they're losing everything. But American people are losing too. It's not that one side loses because the other side is gaining. The middleman in the middle, the global corporation, is milking both sides and controlling both sides.
Then the other side of it is not just as the American worker and the worker in the country that we are dominating lose, but then the American worker is made to be the soldier on the ground that's fighting to defend the interest of these people.
Exactly. And they call it patriotism.
We call many of the leaders of UNAC, although it's not a criteria, or organizations in UNAC that have very many different reasons for fighting war, but a lot of the leadership of UNAC does consider the way to build an anti-war movement is to understand imperialism and call it an anti-imperialist anti-war movement. Do you think that's necessary for an anti-war movement? Do you think we can work with people that just are opposed?
Before I get into that, let me get into the last phase of development that we are facing now. Okay. Because war and militarism was the feature of developed imperialism.
Yes.
Right? Which was based on globalized production. As we are moving into 21st century, it is becoming more clear that the financial institutions, the banks, with the improved technology, the kind of IT developments with more robotic industries, so the information industry, and the computer industry control integration of the whole international financial network.
Yes.
Imperialism is entering a new phase of different ways of controlling, which these new ways are much hidden from the eyes of the people. When they send troops to some country, the population knows. But when they use these methods, they don't. So war is a very costly operation, even for imperialism, right? So they're trying to cut costs as well. So if you can manipulate a country's currency to crash tomorrow, if the country resists the domination, you can do it very cheaply by a few key punches, right? If you can sanction a country and block their resources, you don't have to go to war. You can destroy the country by sitting in New York, in Washington, D.C., right? If you can send drones with this technology, right? Or smart missiles, cruise missiles, or whatever, rather than sending troops. Nobody notices. Look at the shock and awe in Iraq, okay? Overnight, in one night, the first night of attack, 300 cruise missiles were lobbed at Baghdad, right? That was the decisive factor. The rest of it was just cleaning up the rest, right? 300. Each missile at that time was listed as costing $1.5 million. So $450 million overnight was spent on sending 300 cruise missiles into Baghdad, killing the population. When you have conventional war, it's the personnel of the military fighters fighting each other, right? But you don't have it when you're using cruise missiles, right? You're killing populations. So it's mass murder. At the same time, the old conventional war, when you mobilize, for example, for World War II, you know how many industries were running to support that war? How many people were hired?
Mm-hmm.
It would boost the economy. Some people on the fringe of it would benefit, right?
Yes.
With this lobbing of 300 cruise missiles into Baghdad, who was more employed? Which additional person was employed?
Yeah.
Right?
But it is true.
Where was the money sent back to the civilian economy? It was just a transfer of $450 million directly from US Treasury to Lockheed Martin to replace that.
But it is true that the war industry, the military industrial complex, is essential to the economy these days, not only because it builds cruise missiles and airplanes and so forth and guns. It sells them all over the world to places like Saudi Arabia to help them control their populations and the population of Yemen. And it does create a certain workforce, and they tend to put these in the various states to try to diminish the opposition. So in some sense, it is bolstering the economy, which is saying something negative about the way this economy.
I would tell it's not bolstering the economy, Joe.
Yeah, you don't think so?
It used to. The old conventional war would. But this one, first of all, there is no recycling of these investments into the economy itself, civilian economy. Secondly, the weapons industry at this time, when you have M1s and M15s used, you had to hire hundreds of thousands of people to produce the munition for it, right? Yeah. Now, you have a high-tech, automated, robotic production of missiles that is not hiring that many people, right? Yeah. So you're not even hiring more people, you're not creating jobs. Third, when we say, yes, it boosts the economy, but from whose perspective? The question is, it increases the GDP, it boosts the bottom line of these corporations, right?
Yeah.
But not the economy. Because with that expenditure, you have infrastructures deteriorating, you have healthcare deteriorating, you have education deteriorating. So we have to use a different measure when we say boosting the economy.
Yeah, using that money in any other way to build the infrastructure or whatever else, we spend like 64 cents out of every discretionary tax dollar.
69, they say.
So there's no money to do anything else, which would benefit people. And that's very true. The way to support the people of the United States would be to end the military war economy. And that's where we have to get to.
So what was your last question
My last question was about the anti-war movement. So it seems it's important for the anti-war movement to understand the question of imperialism. Not everybody does. I mean, I think
Yes.
most people are good people and they don't want to see violence against other people. They don't want to see people dying. It's one of the reasons that we've gone to a more automated type of warfare, because they don't want to see people dying, and this kind of hides it from them, just in the same way that the way we exploit other countries is hidden from the American people. So what do you think about the anti-war movement? Is it important that we educate around this? Can we work with people, and should we be working with people who look at war from a different perspective? And how should we, understanding imperialism, how should we build the anti-war movement?
Well, excellent issue. First of all, regarding anti-imperialism, not all of the peace movement, all parts of it, are anti-imperialist. No question about it. And I will explain what it means. As you said, they are opposed to killings, to wasteful money spending on things that can be used better. The various social human reasons for opposing the war, right? And it's all good. People who are opposing the war, opposing militarism, have a common interest, regardless of whether anti-imperialist or not anti-imperialist, right? We are united in our interest to oppose anti-human actions and wars that are costing people their lives, that are costing their healthcare, that are costing their economy, everything else, right? So in that sense, even if they are not advocating anti-imperialism, their actions against war, since these wars are triggered by imperialist forces, always, becomes an anti-imperialist action.
I agree.
They don't have to be philosophically anti-imperialist or theoretically anti-imperialist. However, there is a weakness in this if you are not theoretically anti-imperialist. When we say we are anti-imperialist, means for us, the global imperialism is the context of everything else that happens. When you talk about democracy, when you talk about human rights, you cannot separate those from the context of global imperialism and what it is doing, right? I'll give you an example. Any government that is being threatened takes extraordinary measures to protect itself, regardless. Good government, bad government, doesn't matter, right? They try to protect the country and themselves, right? If they are a popular government, their action would be protecting the country. If they are a dictatorial or unpopular government, they are trying to protect themselves, right? Now, I give the example of the United States. When the threat of African American liberation came, you saw the brutal assassinations in this country of leaders of African American movement, Black Panthers Party people, all of those people, their rights, their human rights, their democratic rights, their civil rights were violated by US government because the government felt threatened, right?